Chapter 39 of Buffalo Bill's Ruse by Prentiss Ingraham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. In a web of lies. Ellen West rode forth from Scarlet Gulch in doubt, with Panther Pete believing him to be Buffalo Bill, a man she felt she ought to honor, yet troubled by unpleasant forebodings. He had told her that her father, who was working a claim in the Blue Hills some distance away, wished her to come there, and had sent him to escort her. When they were beyond the town, he said, "Miss West, I didn't want to tell you, but your father is not well." "Not well?" she said, alarmed. "You mean he's very sick, dying perhaps?" "The fact is," he exclaimed, "he fell and hurt himself in that tunnel he's digging. Some rock fell on him, and—" "Oh, he's dying, I know it. Why didn't you tell me at once?" "I didn't want to scare you," he answered. "He's dying." "No, not so bad as that, but he's hurt, and I thought you ought to be out there. Girls are scared of the dark, you know, and so, well, I done the best I could. I didn't want to make you feel bad either, but I reckon the time for you to know it has come." She asked him again and again why he had not told her at first of the injury to her father, and urged him to give details, until in replying to her he had constructed such a piece of fiction that he felt rather proud of it and his abilities in that line. 2 or more miles from the town he was joined by half a dozen rough-looking riders, who peered at the girl from under their slouched hats in a way to make her uneasy. These wild figures fell in behind her and the supposed Buffalo Bill, as if they were the escort. "Friends of mine," said Panther Pete, "some of the members of my band of scouts." "Oh, you're scouts," she said, much relieved. "I'm the chief of the scouts, you know." "Yes, I have heard that. And these are some of them?" She glanced at the sky. Being a prairie girl, she knew the stars by sight, and was able to tell which was north as well as anyone. She saw the Big Dipper with its 2 outer stars pointing to the North Star. She had observed that a change had been made in their course, and she saw that a further change of course occurred now, a change that surprised her, for she knew it was not the right direction to take her to her father's claim. She spoke of it to the man who rode beside her. "Oh, yes, right you are, but you see, it's this way. There's danger now in going the straight course, and so we make this circle. We'll be steering in the other direction soon." "What is the danger?" she asked. "Outlaws," he said gravely. "Outlaws? You've heard of the stage hold-ups? Well, it's the fellows who have been doing that work. These men here saw them over in that direction this afternoon, and so we're trying to get round them. I didn't want to worry you by mentioning it." This satisfied her for a time, but when in the course of 2 or 3 hours of brisk riding, they passed through a deep canyon pass and came to a hollow in the hills, at a point which she was sure was a long way from her father's mining claim, and there saw some log huts of poor construction, and the party was challenged by a guard. His fears sprung up. "What does this mean?" she demanded. "We're going to get a stronger force here," said Panther Pete, still thinking that lying would serve him best. "We need a large escort." Again she was silent, and they passed into the valley. Some dogs barked loudly, but were driven back to their kennels, and then she was before one of the huts and was told to dismount. Panther Pete swung down and helped her from the saddle. "We'll rest a little while," he explained. "Then we'll go on again." "But we ought to hurry right on, for father may be dying," she protested. "We'll need a little rest," he urged, and he opened the door of the hut and showed her within. She stood in the darkness inside, hesitating, for she began to feel that something was wrong. Panther Pete followed her into the hut, and then lighted a lamp, which stood on a low table at the opposite side of the room. By its lights, he saw that the hut contained but one room. "Just stay here and rest a minute," he urged, "and I'll be right back. I'll have something brought for you to eat, and then in a little while we'll go on again." However, when he retreated and closed the door, she distinctly heard the key turned in the lock. "Mr. Cody?" she called after him, still hearing his retreating footsteps. "Mr. Cody?" She shook the door and then pounded on it with her closed fist and called again. But he did not answer, and he did not turn back. Bewildered now and badly frightened, she shook the door again and again, and raised her voice in loud calls. One of the dogs set up a barking outcry, hearing her, but no human being responded. There was no window in the hut, but near the roof were some small holes that let in light and air. She could not climb up to those holes, and it would not have helped her if she could have done so. In despair, she glanced round the room. It contained a rude bed, some chairs, and a table and lamp, and nothing else. The floor was of earth, beaten hard. She sat down to await the return of the man who had locked her in. By and by she heard him coming, and she heard the key turn in the lock when he opened the door. She was on her feet, facing him, as he entered. "I must ask you to explain this. She panted and hesitated for words. He closed the door quickly and stepped in front of it. "Why is it?" he said. "Why? You locked me in when you went away. Why did you do that?" "For your protection," he said, still thinking it best to lie to her. "For my protection?" "Yes, some of these men here I don't trust. They're all right as scouts, and all that, but I don't trust them. I've got to stay here a little while, until we can get more men, for the outlaws, it's reported, are in strong force between here and the Blue Hills." His manner had changed, and the truth suddenly came to her with its startling revelation. "You're not Buffalo Bill," she cried, gasping. "Who's been telling you I'm not?" he said, startled. "Oh, I know it. I feel it. You can't be Buffalo Bill. I did hear rumors and thought them." "What rumors?" he demanded. "That Buffalo Bill was not in this part of the country, and that you were a fake Buffalo Bill, but I didn't believe them for I was making love to you and all that." He laughed harshly. "No, because you were father's friend." "Well, I've been good to him for your sake," he said brazenly. She became terrified, for this seemed almost a confession that he was not Buffalo Bill. "I've been good to him," he repeated, "and he knows it, and he don't doubt that I'm Buffalo Bill. I let him have $1,000 to help him out with that claim." She regarded him with terror, for there was a change in his manner, a reckless change apparently. "You will take me on to father's claim as soon as possible?" she said. He dropped to a rough stool close by the door, in such a manner that the door was still guarded by his body. "Well, what if I'm not Buffalo Bill, as you say?" I'm afraid you're not." "And if I ain't?" he demanded. "You have told me you were," she gasped. "And you've said I wasn't. Well, I ain't." He paused to note the effect of his words. She withdrew toward the other side of the room, alarm and fright showing in her face and manner. "I'm not Buffalo Bill, though I reckon as that ain't the name that his mother gave him. I've as much right to it as he has. In other words, I'm not Bill Cody, and I reckon, too, that you've heard of me. Most people around here have. Do you want to know who I am? I'm Panther Pete." She screamed and crowded closer against the wall when she heard that dreaded name. Panther Pete, it was a name of infamy, a name that reeked with blood, a name to blanch the cheek of woman or man. for the miscreant who bore it was notorious as a murderer and outlaw, with innumerable black and bloody crimes laid at his door. "You've heard of me, I see," he remarked with a sardonic smile. She did not answer, but stared at him, large-eyed and fearful. "And now that you know who I am, what do you say to it? Ain't I as good-looking as I was before? As I was when you thought me Buffalo Bill? Buffalo Bill? Faugh! He's a milksop that tries to make people believe that kindness pays when you're dealing with Indians and cattle like that, and then has to go out and shoot up them same Indians for their deviltry, and that's it his own words. It ain't been any special honor to me to play Buffalo Bill, but I had a reason for doing it, which was to get him in a sling. I think he's in that sling about now, and he won't get out of it easy." It was a long speech, but he seemed to enjoy his words, and the terror they brought to the countenance of the girl. "Please, take me to my father," she begged. He laughed again harshly. "You believed that part of it too, did you? Please, take me to my father." "Well, that's the thing I ain't thinking of doing. I couldn't afford to deprive myself of your charming presence, you know. I've taken a fancy to you, my dear. I'm dead in love with you." She wanted to scream again. "You know I told you that once, at your home over there in Scarlet Gulch," he continued calmly. "You thought I was Buffalo Bill, and you smiled when I said it. I'm the same man, and when I say it now, you show a weak disposition and a tendency to holler, which is unkind of you." She turned on him in wild desperation. "You must let me out of this house," she cried. "I won't stay here. You promised to take me to my father, and—" "Promises made to a handsome woman are like the proverbial pie crust, made to be broken. I wanted to bring you here." "And lie to me?" "Yes, I lied to you like a sinner. I might as well admit it. I ought to have told you the truth at first. Only I thought you'd yell, and there would be a sweet mess of it in the street, maybe with a lot of fellows chasing me and trying to shoot me full of holes. So I lied to you." "And my father?" "I ain't seen your father for a good while. That was a lie too. I think he's well and healthy. I don't expect to see him again soon." "And you intend—" "Just to keep you here a while, my dear, out of affection for you, pure and simple. And then, as soon as it's safe, we'll hack out for a preacher I know about who'll marry us. He ain't in good standing in the church just now, but he can tie the matrimonial knot as tight for us as the next one, and that's what we want. You see, he got into trouble at the last church he presided over, and when some of the deacons and leading members wanted to put him in jail, he just jumped the country and came to me. And I've treated him better than ever they did, and he's making more money." "He's a member of your band of road agents?" she cried. "I don't call them that. They're gentlemen of the road, doing good to the world by taking money from rich folks who don't need it, and handing it over to poor folks that do, with just a little for themselves by way of toll for the trouble. And yet people say hard things against us, and invite us to necktie parties and all that. It's unjust and unreasonable." Ellen West had never before seen the devil displayed in human form, as she now saw it in this smiling, handsome fellow who said these things as coolly as if they were bad jests, and sat there, his white teeth showing as he laughed. He looked to be a fiend incarnate. Realizing just what he was, and all the horror of her own position, she wanted to shriek. Then she began to beg him again to let her go, and he answered in the same way, laughing at her words, and making light of her fears. "Miss West," he said, "you'll find us just the finest lad you ever met. So don't be afraid and go off into a fit. I'm going to make you my wife. I've sworn to have the life of Buffalo Bill." I planned a little trick that I think will get him as soon as he puts his nose into Scarlet Gulch. If it doesn't, I've got some other plans that will. I intend to do him up for some things I owe him. That will, of course, necessitate my sudden retirement from this section. I shall emigrate, get out of the country, and go in search of pastures new. And I know where those pastures are, green and flowing with gold dollars and milk and honey. I want somebody to go with me for company, and I've hit on you as the female angel that will soothe and counsel me in that time of retreat and trial. I've got to snag a boat just built for two up in the mountains, and we'll bill and coo there like a pair of turtle doves and forget those awful times down here. He sat before her, his elbows on his knees, his hands supporting his chin, and looked at her. And she stared at him, as the charmed bird is said to stare helplessly at the serpent. She saw how helpless she was in the power of this man. About her were the plains and the rolling hills, and darkness and distance. She did not even know where this hut and this valley were situated, nor how far she had come after leaving Scarlet Gulch. But she knew that in this valley were the road agents who acknowledged the authority of this man, Panther Pete. Yes, she was helpless, and she realized it. "Oh, let me go," she begged in terror, throwing herself on her knees before him. "Please, let me go. I shall pray for you every day of my life. If you will let me go. I once considered you an honorable man, and—" He put out his hand and touched her head, causing her to shiver. "My dear girl, have a little sense," he said. "It is such a terrible thing to think of marrying me. I'll bet that, when you thought I was Buffalo Bill, you were of the opinion that I was rather a stunning fellow in general appearance. Now, didn't you? And I'm as good looking now and then. Come, be sensible. I'm not going to scalp you or feed you to my dogs out there. In fact, I'm not going to hurt you at all. I'm simply going to hold you until you're willing to go before our parson and marry me. Think what that will mean. You will be the wife of Panther Pete and queen of the road agents. Doesn't the prospect allure you? If it doesn't, it ought to. To be queen of a road agents isn't so small a matter as you may think it. There are jolly lad and fighters everyone from the ground up. There are worse jobs than being queen to a set of fellows like that. Why, if you should be kind to them and say a good word now and then to them, there ain't a man among them wouldn't die for you and feel happy if you paid him with a smile. I'm going to let you think about this. Think it over for a time and carefully. We're not such a bad lot. We do our robbing and stealing boldly, and risk our lives. Other men steal and rob undercover by giving short weight, cheating their customers, stealing from the bank depositors and covering it up with lying figures, and in 1,000 other ways. And the world thinks such fellows are great stuff. They're thieves as much as we are, but they're cowardly thieves, which makes them worse than we are. Many a man that lives in a big house in the town and drives his wife out Sundays in a shining carriage is a whole lot more of a bad man than I am. And the world thinks he's fine as silk. It all depends on how you do the stealing. Make the stealing respectable and you respectable. Steal boldly, and the penitentiary waits for you. He rose from his seat by the door. "My dear," he said, as his hand fell on the knob, and he seemed about to go. "Just think that over. I'll be good to you. I'm actually half in love with you, and I'll be wholly so if you'll give me a chance. You're as handsome as a picture, and I like pretty women. I'll play fair by you. I'll treat you well, and you may have anything in the way of fine clothes and other finery that you want." His brow darkened as a new thought came to him. "And I understand that it's just as well to do as I say and do it gracefully, for you can't get away, Accept my offer, and you'll have no trouble. But make trouble for us, and, well, you can see that we'll have to make trouble for you." He drew the door open and stepped through to the outside, with his hand on the knob and on the key. She saw that she could not escape by a wild rush, and he seemed to read her thought. "No, there ain't no use trying it, for you couldn't get away, even if you got out of this house. The entrance to this valley is guarded, and there are the dogs. They're kind, unless we set them on the trail of somebody, and then that somebody had better look out if the dogs overtake him. So don't try. I'd hate to have the dogs chew you up. Not but that you'd make dainty eating for them, but I shouldn't like it, and for you it would be mightily unpleasant." He stirred to lock the door, drawing it half shut. "Think it over," he urged. "I'm serious, and in this game of robbery I'm not a hypocrite. But play the game fair, and risk my life like a man in doing it. Think it over. To be queen of Panther Pete's road agents won't be so bad as you may think. Take time to study the situation. I'll make you a good husband if you'll give me the chance. And if you don't willingly, I'll be your husband anyway, and you'll have your trouble for your pains." He closed the door and locked it, and she heard his footsteps as he departed. Then she threw herself blindly on the floor, in a very paroxysm of terror and anguish, sobbing. "I must get away from here," she cried. "I must. Tonight. Oh, I must get out of this house." End of chapter 39. Chapter 40 of Buffalo Bill's Ruse by Prentiss Ingraham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Rainmaker. Panther Pete was not fool enough not to know that there would be a pursuit of himself, although he hoped that Buckeye Slocum and his friend Nate Rainey would be able to divert that pursuit in a wrong direction. Yet he was taking no chances, so he sent back over the various trails that led in the direction of Scarlet Gulch what he called stool pigeons, clever members of his road agent band, men whose shrewdness he could rely on, and whose judgment and courage he could trust. It was the business of these men to draw any pursuers into a certain trap, a peculiar place, rock surrounded, not far from the hidden valley, where they could be slaughtered readily by the road agents. Bill Hatfield was one of the pigeons, and about the shrewdest of the lot. He had been sent out, and he had climbed into a low, thick tree after morning came, and from that coign of vantage was watching the trail that stretched in the direction of the town, expecting momentarily to see it something worthwhile. What he saw after a time was Silas DeLand and young Ben Denton. They were mounted, but were coming on slowly, for Denton's wound made him weak. He was hollow-eyed and pale, in this respect his face being a most marked contrast with the red face of the land. "It ain't Buffalo Bill," said the pigeon in the tree, "nor anybody like him, but they're from the town, and what they're out here for anybody don't need to ask. So I reckons, according to the order of their boss, it's my duty to cut in if I can." Yet he did not descend from the tree, but sat crouched in the thick branches, watching the advance of the pair. When the horsemen reached the tree, which stood on a little eminence, they halted, just under him. "I reckon we'll lie down here a little while and rest you," said DeLand kindly, glancing about and seeing no signs of enemies. "I believe that place is not far from here," said Denton, though pale and weak. The fire of courage and determination burned in his eyes and revealed itself in his voice. "I'd like to push right on." "There are more of our crowd and our kind out here somewhere," said Denton's companion, "and I for signaling to them. It will draw the attention of the road agents if they're near." "Well, what if it does? I'd like to bring a little rain. This country is more droughted up than the desert of Sahara, and that's what brought me here to Scarlet Gulch. You know, as I've been telling you, the droughty condition out here. Says I to myself, if I can go out there and bring rain, it means the biggest kind of big money in my pocket." He had slipped from his saddle and was helping the young man to dismount. When Denton was on the ground and had groped his way weakly to the foot of the tree, where he dropped down with a sigh of relief, Silas DeLand turned his attention to a grip, or handbag, of queer make, which he had hung at the horn of his saddle. He set this on the ground by the tree, and then dropping down by the side of Denton, he opened it. "I was telling you about that," he said, "and about the lag I had over in Arizona. Well, the land is that dry and burned up in Arizona that men are compelled to drink whiskey because there ain't water enough to go round." He sprung open the bag, and within lay a number of small egg-shaped white objects. The spy in the tree craned his neck to see them, and stared with popping eyes. At first he thought they were eggs, but when DeLand took one of them out and began to talk about it, the spy discovered his mistake. "It's this way," said DeLand, turning the white object around in his fingers, handling it as gingerly as if it were an egg and he feared to break it. "This land out here is the driest part of creation. The last good rain was, I reckon, when Noah had his flood and the mountains became seas." It was funny. He turned the egg-shaped thing around in his fingers again. "The way them scalawags humped when I pitched one of these things into the midst of them there in Scarlet Gulch. They thought they'd been dynamited." He chuckled so much that for a second or two he could not go on. "But it was harmless, perfectly harmless, unless man should get some of the fire in his hair, or in his skin, or on his clothing, and then it might burn him some. Otherwise, it was perfectly harmless. But you saw it, and did you ever see so small an object made so much fire and smoke? And didn't that gang of vigilantes fall all over themselves in trying to get out of the way? But perfectly harmless, perfectly harmless." The spy in the tree stared harder than before. One of them members had been with the map in front of the flashlight when the explosion came, and he had told about it to the other members of Panther Pete's gang, narrating a wonderful story. So the rascal in the tree knew what was meant by the singular words of Silas DeLand, knew quite as well as did young Denton. It was strange. Denton assented wearily. It was plain he was not interested. He was thinking of the perils of Allen West, and was chafing at what seemed an enforced and needless delay. He wanted to be hurrying ahead instead of resting there under that tree. "You've heard about my rain-making experiments?" said DeLand. "No, I don't think I have, except what you've told me," Denton answered. DeLand looked surprised and disappointed. He had fancied that his fame had preceded him. "Well, it was at White Cloud, Arizona, where I made my biggest experiment. No rain there for nigh about a year, and everything dry as a powder mill. There wasn't a speck of cloud in the sky when I went there. I says to the people of White Cloud, 'Give me $1,000 after it's done, and I'll bring you all the rain you want inside of 24 hours. He stopped and looked at the sky, and then pointed a finger, seeming to the spy in the tree to be pointing straight at him. "Look there now. When I set off that bomb in the crowd before the flashlight, There wasn't a cloud as big as a man's hand anywhere in sight. I'll leave it to you if there was. No, there wasn't. And now look at the sky, all covered over with clouds, and will sure rain inside of 24 hours, especially if I set off some more of them. I think I'll turn this one loose. It will signal to our friends, maybe, and bring them to us. And it will bring rain to fill up some of these hollers, so that we'll have water for ourselves and our horses, and won't be in danger of thirsting to death before we get back. He toyed with a little bomb. What do you say? I'm too tired to form an opinion, Denton answered. Well, we need help, and that's a fact. We don't know where we're going. We're just ambling along, trusting to luck. Luck is a good thing, but some other things are better. This is, he patted the egg-shaped thing. So, if you don't object, I think I'll touch her off. The road agents are as likely to see it and come as our friends. We'll keep our eyes open, and there's one thing. If any road agents are drawn by it, we can keep out of sight of them, and then we can trail them. And by trailing them, we'll find where their hotel is out here, and we'll be close then to the place where they're holding the young lady. This was to Ben Denton the most convincing argument of all. Go ahead, he said wearily. He sat against the tree, his hat pulled over his eyes, his whole appearance showing that he was on the verge of exhaustion. All right, said the lad. Here she goes, but this is a different kind from that I throwed in the street. This kind you touch off like a rocket by lighting this end. When it shoots up into the air, you'll be surprised when you see it go. It's my own invention. All of them are, and I think I've hit on a thing that's going to make my fortune. The spy in the tree had grown so interested in all this that he had nearly forgotten what he was there for. He saw the lance set the small white object on its large end on the ground, and then he saw him light a match and touch the lighted match to the sharp or upper end. Almost instantly there was a flash and a roar. Something that was blazing bright shot by him with a whistling screech, so alarming and astonishing him that he emitted a yell, and fell headlong out of the tree. The bomb sailed on into the sky, sputtering like a rocket, as the pigeon struck the ground. Though DeLand and Denton were both astonished by this tumble of the man out of the tree, they were not too surprised to act promptly. DeLand sprang on the man and bore him backward to the ground. As the fellow tried to rise, he yelled for Denton to come to his aid, and this Denton did with such alacrity that he seemed not to be very weak after all. As for the spy, the fall had knocked the breath out of him, this with his astonishing tumble from the tree, and the thing that had preceded it, made him an easy victim. Almost before he knew it, the lion had him by the throat, and was choking him, and the younger man was also throwing himself on him, helping to hold him down. The rockety thing that has flashed into the sky exploded there, emitting a big puff of white smoke that spread out and began to form what was in shape a small cloud. "Let up!" the spy gargled as he felt the lion's fingers dig into his throat. However, the lion did not let up until young Denton had secured one of the horsehair lariats, and from it had made cords and bound the prisoner. By this time the pigeon was almost black in the face and half senseless. The lion turned his attention to the sky and to that floating smoke cloud. As soon as he could do so, just then a few drops of rain sputtered in his upturned face. It was but a natural phenomenon, of course, but the land was ready to ascribe that sputter of rain to the effect of his exploding rain bomb. He yelled with glee and stretched out his hands, calling on Denton to witness that it had actually rained. "Denton," he cried, "if I should send up enough of them things, I could drown the world, same it was in the days of Noah. Did you notice that beautiful sprinkle?" Denton was paying attention to the prisoner. The spy gurgled and coughed, wriggled about, but was helpless. Then he recalled that bright thing which had startled him by flashing with a hissing roar past his face, and he stumbled out of the tree. He lay back on the ground, groaning. Then his face brightened, for he realized that he had not played in such bad luck after all. The command of Panther Pit was for him to intercept one of the pursuing parties, let that party capture him, and then offer to lead it to the hidden home of the outlaws, when Panther Pit would have a force ready to wipe the said pursuers out. The land came back from the clouds and gave some attention to his prisoner. "Who are you, and what was you doing there in the tree?" he demanded, a thing which Denton had demanded already. "I'm Bill Hatfield," confessed the rascal. Sure, they had never heard his name before. "I'm a peaceable citizen." "What was you doing in that tree?" "Come," cried Denton as he produced a revolver. "I know who you are, all right? You're not from the town, and that's proof to me that you are one of Panther Pit's men. Admit it, or I put a bullet through you." Hatfield squirmed, then said with seeming reluctance, "Well, what you going to do about it? I'm one of them fellers, but—" "Ah, I knew it. And you were doing what up in that tree?" "I seen you coming, and just shined up there to keep you from seeing me. And say," he turned to the lad, "what was the thing you shot at me anyhow?" "That was a rain bomb," said the lad proudly. "Young man, I didn't shoot it at you, but you were permitted to see then a marvelous exhibition, an effort to bring rain from rainless clouds, and a successful one too, for see," he held out in his hand, "it's sprinkling, and it's been dry as a bone in this country since about the year 1. Now, ain't that so?" Denton still held the revolver ready cocked, and again he pointed it at the rascal's head. "You know where Panther Pit has his lair. You'll tell us, or down you go." The rascal wriggled and squirmed, yet this was the thing he wanted. "I don't dare to tell," he protested. "Why?" "'Cause Panther Pit would kill me." "And I'll kill you if you don't. So there you are. Take your choice." There was a strange flash of excitement on the face of Denton, and a bright and staring light in his eyes. Hatfield saw that in his present mental condition, Denton was not a man to fool with. "I'll shoot you sure," said Denton, "if you don't tell me promptly where Panther Pit is." I, Hatfield stammered, a bit terrified. "Out with it." "I couldn't tell you, but I might lead you to the place." "That's as good." Denton turned to the lad. "It's sprinkling," said the lad joyfully. "By all the frogs of Egypt, it's actually sprinkling, and in this country where—" "The land, did you hear what he says? That he will guide us to the lair of Panther Pit?" He pointed the pistol again at the head of the prisoner. "Another question," he said. "Is there a young lady held prisoner there?" The spy again hesitated. "Out with it!" shouted Denton. "Well, yes, there is." "It's the young lady, is it, who was taken last night from Scarlet Gulch, Miss Ellen West?" "I don't know her name," said the spy, "but it's her, for she was brought from that town." "And she's in that place now, held there by Panther Pit?" "You're right. Anyway, she's there in one of the houses." "So, they've got houses there." He turned to the land again. "Get the horses ready, the land, And this fellow is to be put on mine. I'll sit behind him, and make him guide the horse and pilot us. And if he tries any treachery, I'll shoot a hole through him." His voice quivered. He was in deadly earnest. "Correct you are," said the land, and he brought up the horses. "Now I'm going to untie your feet so that you can get into that saddle," said Denton. "But if you try to get away, I'll pot you with this pistol, understand?" He cast off the cords that held Hatfield's feet, and the rascal mounted to the saddle agilely enough. "Now, Deland, give me a lift." Deland gave him the lift, and Denton secured a seat behind the prisoner. "Now, Deland, tie his feet under the horse's belly." Hatfield did not like this, but he could not help it, for he had a healthy fear of that big revolver, and his own weapons had been taken away from him. Deland also mounted, and they were ready to start. The smoke from the rain bomb had dissipated, but there was a cloudy sky and the threat of rain. "I'd like to fire off some more of the bombs, and just see what come of it," said Deland wishfully. "I'll bet we'd have a flood before night, if I did, but I ought to save them, I suppose, to try for rain down in the towns. That's why I came there in the first place. You can tell what an awful dry country it is by seeing the people hurry to the flashlight." He laughed humorously and studied the sky. "By Jove, I'd like to try some more of them bombs." He had the grip at the saddle horn in front of him as he thus rode forth. Hatfield smiled to himself, with face turned away. He was not pleased to be tied up so tightly, but he was pleased by the fact that this man had commanded him to lead them to the lair of Panther Pit. He was leading them now toward the trap in the rock-girt hollow, where he knew Panther Pit would have sharp-shooting riflemen lying in ambush. Those riflemen, he believed, would cut the riders down with bullets, and he would be free again in a very short time. End of chapter 40. Chapter 41 of Buffalo Bill's Ruse by Prentiss Ingraham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A Girl's Heroism. Chapter 41. A Girl's Heroism. When the first shock of fright and terror had passed away, Ellen West began to consider her situation with more calmness. The feeling that she must escape was so strong that she searched the little hut carefully, trying to discover some method of breaking out. It would not have resisted the efforts of a good burglar, but it was built too strongly for her to make any breach in the walls or door. She studied the floor of hard-beaten earth, wondering if she could not tunnel under the walls. With this thought in view, she inspected the little table. Finally, she tried to break the table up, hoping to get a substitute for a spade from one of the boards. She succeeded in breaking off one of the table legs, but that was as far as she could go in demolishing the table. The table leg made a good club, but a poor digging implement. In despair, she began to try to claw a hole under the wall with her fingers, but made such poor progress that she desisted after a time, breathless and discouraged, although she still was resolved to get out, and to get out before the return of the human fiend who had captured her. Making the round of the room again, and studying it by the light of the lamp burning on the floor. She had placed it there when she took it from the table. She observed that over the door was a projection of the upper door ledge. Back of that was a small space where the stout logs fell away, making a sort of cranny or cupboard-like hole, over the door and under the roof. She wondered if, by reaching that, she could not with the club poke a hole in the roof, and so get out that way. She drew the broken table up by the side of the door, and mounting it, she reached up and took hold of the door ledge. To get up into that cranny would require the exertion of all her strength and climbing skill. She made the attempt, holding in one hand the table leg, and in doing so overturned the table, and for a moment or so hung suspended there by her hands. But she drew herself up pluckily, and by gaining a foothold in some inequalities of the wall, she, with great exertion, climbed up to the ledge. Having gained the cranny, she dropped down, breathless and nearly exhausted. Before she had sufficiently regained her strength to attack the roof with the table leg club, she heard footsteps outside, sounding like the footsteps of Panther Pit. If he came into the house, she felt that she was lost. He would at once see the broken and overturned table, and find her above the door, and would drag her down and take steps to prevent her escape. The thought nerved her to desperation. She heard him come up to the door, and heard him fumbling with the key in the lock. In very desperation, she crouched above the door, holding the club. The door flew open, and he stirred to enter the room. She steeled her nerves and summoned all her strength. Then, quick as a flash, and before he could do anything, she brought the table leg club down in his head with all her might. The blow was a heavy one, and without a moan or a groan, Panther Pit fell forward into the room, lying in a heap just where he fell. The girl almost collapsed with horror at the deed she had done, but she saw that now was her time to escape, before this deed was discovered by his followers, or he returned to consciousness, if she had not killed him. She feared she had killed him. He lay so still. The thought held her, trembling, for a full time on the ledge. Then she climbed down, stumbling against him as she half fell to the floor. He moaned and moved, and this so frightened her that she sprung through the doorway to the outside. She still held the club, but she was too frightened to step and close the door, or put out the light. All she could do was to run, and she ran as fast as she could, with trembling limbs, straight away from the horror of that hut. She saw other huts not far off, and from the window of one a light gleamed. She thought she heard men talking, and the bark of a dog. Yet she hardly knew what she saw or heard. The horror of the thing she had done so filled and terrified her. To her mind, it was an awful thing to take a human life, even the life of such a man as Panther Pit. So she ran on blindly, almost heedlessly, yet somehow managed to avoid the other huts, and was not observed by either the man or the dogs. Soon she found herself close up by a wall of rock that formed part of the rocky hill on that side. As she could not climb over the hill, she ran on along its base. This hill formed one side of the little valley containing the lair of Panther Pit, and as she followed on, she was taken toward the narrow entrance, where, as she knew from his words, guards were stationed. She thought of this as she stumbled on, and slowed her pace, trying to become wary, and listened for some sound which would tell her where the guards were located. Every moment she expected to hear a clamor behind her, announcing the discovery of her flight from the hut and the condition of Panther Pit. When she thought of what a pursuit by the dogs meant, she could hardly hurry on at all. So weak did that thought make her. But the discovery of Panther Pit was delayed, and she continued to advance along the base of the hill toward the entrance. As she approached it, she recalled its shape, for through it she had been brought. It was like the neck of a battle, the valley forming the battle. High walls were on either side, and the battle neck was the pass, guarded by sentries probably stationed in the trail, and by others watching on the sides of the walls. The darkness aided her. She grew more and more cautious, and was able after a time to control her shaking nerves and her fear-wrought fancies, when a pursuit by the dogs and the outlaws was not made. She saw before her the narrow opening, the sky above making the upper parts of the walls visible. She crouched low and almost crawled forward, her listening strained to the utmost tension. She tried to subdue her hurried breathing, and realized that to do so she must go very slow, and so permit herself to regain breath. At times she seemed hardly to move at all, as she kept close by one of the dark walls, seeking the deepest shadows for security. She saw no guard, yet was sure they were there. Perhaps for the reason that the sentries did not expect anyone to come from the valley, and therefore were directing all their attention to the front, where, if danger came, it would be in the form of pursuers. She passed the sentinels on the walls without being seen, and also came close up to the one who was stationed down in the pass. Luckily he saw this man, for he was moving about, his gun on his arm. She dropped to the ground as if dead when she discovered him, and lay there studying the situation, wondering how she was to get by without discovery. She saw that he walked a bit like a sentinel, from one wall to the other, and that always, when he looked at all, he looked toward the outer entrance. When she had discovered this, she waited until he turned to walk toward the opposite wall, and then crawled on with the utmost care. She meant to spring to her feet and make a wild dash to pass him if he saw her. When he had reached the opposite wall, and before he turned, she was lying flat on her face, and could not be seen by him. As she made a second advance, it brought her so near to him that, when he returned, she was within 2 yards of him. She was almost sure he could hear her breathing and the heavy beating of her heart, for both sounded to her very loud. But he turned back again, toward the outer wall. She crawled on and was beyond him when he came back. When she made her next advance and stepped, she was well beyond him. Then came a terrifying thing. The discovery of her escape was announced by low calls from the huts, and by the hurried tramp of feet. Men were rushing about in there, and she knew what it meant. The guard heard the sound, and turned his attention to the valley. "What's broke loose?" she heard one of the sentries ask on the wall. She crept on, snail-like, it seemed to her, hugging the ground. Then she heard the dogs being called, and their baying as they began to search for her trail. One of the guards on the wall voiced his disapproval of this move. "I don't know what the boss is thinking about making such a racket. That row can be heard a mile." The girl took advantage of the talk that followed to slip on a short distance. She discerned that the confused sounds of the men and the dogs were coming toward the pass, and regardless of the guards, who were still near, she rose to a more erect posture, and stole on along the wall, keeping well within the shadows. Soon she was running, and as she got further on, she ran faster. Then before her opened the more open country, which gave a better light, and she realized that she had got through the pass that was outside of the hidden valley. It gave her hope, only a terrible fear of those mouthing dogs clung to her, and this fear made her run on and on. As soon as she was able, she shifted her course and climbed the high ridge on that side. She stumbled and slipped, and more than once fell, but the courage of fear kept up her strength and sent her on. When she gained the top of the ridge, the valley lay below her, and the pass also, both dark as pockets. She could see nothing down there, but above her the stars shone brightly, and the light on the high ridge was good enough to enable her to see her way. She was breathing hard and trembling, but her determination to escape was in no wise abated. Then she began the descent, knowing not what was before her, although behind her she knew were the dogs and outlaws, and perhaps the dead body of Panther Pit. She shuddered at that, and at the recollections conjured up by his name, and the recollections of the time when she had believed him to be Buffalo Bill, and she thought of her father and of her lover, Ben Denton. It should be said that she thought of Denton continuously. Fortunately for her peace of mind, she did not know that he had been shot down in the town by Panther Pit. By the time she had descended from the high ridge, her clothing was torn, her hands scratched, and her shoes were becoming ragged. But still she kept on. Then, to her alarm, she heard the dogs more distinctly. They seemed to have gained the top of the ridge, and their loud baying rang out. End of chapter 41. Chapter 42 of Buffalo Bill's Ruse by Prentiss Ingraham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Another stool pigeon. Buffalo Bill and Wild Bill had gained the Blue Hills in the region of Panther Pit's stronghold. They had escaped from the vigilantes in a manner that was not even yet clear to them, for they had no present means of discovering who threw the bomb which gave them the opportunity to get away from the mob. Whoever he was, they felt grateful to him and called him their friend. As their purpose was to hunt down Panther Pit as soon as they were safely out of the town, they shaped their course in the direction of the hills, where, as they had previously learned, Panther Pit had a stronghold. It seemed a blind attempt to locate it, for the Blue Hills were of large area. However, the daring scouts had more than once set out with less to guide them in their efforts to run down some desperado, and had succeeded. They were sure that a pursuit would be made from the town, and they knew that, if hard pressed, the Blue Hills would give them refuge as well as it gave Panther Pit. As they rode on, both mounted on one horse, they discussed Panther Pit and what they had heard of him, and the singular fact, as it seemed to them, that both had appeared at about the same time in Scarlet Gulch, led by the same motive. They pitched camp in the borders of the Blue Hills, and awaited there the coming of day. Sunrise was no more than upon them when they beheld a man who had set forth to find and misguide the pursuers of Panther Pit, a man who was one of the stool pigeons already described. This man came up to them, riding a piebald pony. He had keen black eyes that bored them through and through. His clothing was nondescript, but the rifle he bore and the revolvers he carried were of the best and latest patterns. "Howdy," he said, and he looked Buffalo Bill straight in the face, knowing at a glance who he was, for the resemblance to the man who was his leader was remarkable. "I've been looking all around for you," he added, with rare confidence and nerve. The scouts were a bit puzzled. "Yes," said Buffalo Bill, "and now that you've found us—" "Well, I didn't know what orders you might have for the boys." He was making the daring pretense of believing that this man was the fake Buffalo Bill. Buffalo Bill dropped a hand to his ready revolver. "What do you take me for?" he asked. "Buffalo Bill, of course," said the man, with a meaning grin. "Yes, that's my handle, as we say in this country, but I don't seem to know you." The man opened his eyes in professed surprise. "Don't know me? Me, Sam Garland? I reckon you've got a southern trouble off your head if you don't know me." He stopped and made a pretense of staring harder and in astonishment. His acting was really excellent, so excellent that it fooled even the clever scouts. Suddenly he wheeled his horse, jerking it round. "Stop!" Buffalo Bill shouted, snatching his revolver. The man pulled in with a jerk that threw his horse well back. "Don't shoot!" he yelled. Again his acting was astonishingly clever. "Surrender!" Wild Bill commanded, covering the fellow with a revolver. "Yes, don't shoot!" The man sat trembling in his saddle, his actions still being but a clever pretense. He was one of the best of Panther Pete's stool pigeons. Wild Bill cocked the bridle of his horse. "Dismount!" Buffalo Bill commanded. The man slid from the saddle. "Now I've got you covered, and shall bore you through if you start to run," said the scout. "And I'll bore you through if you don't talk lively and give some straight answers," added Wild Bill. "Yes, don't shoot," begged Garland in professed terror. "You thought I was the fellow who is writing about this section claiming to be Buffalo Bill?" said the scout. The man hesitated. He knew he had to steer carefully now. A false movement might mean his death. "Yes," he said, "that's what I thought." "And that man's Panther Pete?" "Yes." "Well, I'll inform you that I'm the real Buffalo Bill, and if your leader looks enough like me to fool even one of his own men, I shall begin to be ashamed of my personal appearance, for I understand he's one of the worst desperadoes of the border." Garland did not answer this. "How far is Panther Pete's home from this place?" Garland hesitated, not because he did not know, but to pretend a hesitation he did not feel. "Speak up!" commanded Wild Bill tartly. "I don't know for just how far," said Garland. "You could lead us to the place, of course." "Yes, I guess I could." "We'll have you do that. You've just come from there?" "Yes." "Bear in mind," said Wild Bill, "that if any trickery is played, you'll be dropped first thing with a bullet through you. There will be no fooling." Garland's face paled a little. This man had a reputation for being quick and sure shots, and he knew the danger he had placed himself in. Then his nerve returned. "If I'm shot," he said, "it will be by some of their boys or by their boss for betraying them, I'm thinking." They tied his hands, and then compelled him to mount to the back of his horse. Wild Bill mounted behind him, and Buffalo Bill tied the feet of the rascal together under the horse's belly. "We've got a horse apiece now, old pard," said Wild Bill, laughing. "I didn't think we'd stay long without mounts for both of us." Now, heave ahead, Sam. And mind you, no trickery. We won't stand it. Garland indicated the direction to be taken, which he claimed was the right direction to Panther Pit's stronghold. In reality, the direction he pointed out was that toward the trap into which the stool pigeons were instructed to decoy pursuers. So they rode along, with Garland and Wild Bill leading the way. End of chapter 42. Chapter 43 of Buffalo Bill's Ruse by Prentiss Ingraham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The capture of Panther Pit. Panther Pit was not dead. The sturdy blow of the girl had felled him, and he had fallen insensible to the earthen floor. And there he lay for some time as unconscious as a log. For the girl had struck hard, and she had struck true, though her strength did not enable her to deliver a blow of skull-cracking force. Panther Pit came back to consciousness, and himself discovered that the girl was gone, and that the door of the hut stood wide open. The discovery stirred him into renewed life. He crawled out of the hut and called for aid, and when he gained the attention of some of his men, he berated them in hard language for their inattention, which had enabled the girl to escape thus from the hut and pass, as she had done, almost through the midst of the camp. It was at this juncture that the outcry was raised, which the girl heard as she fled away through the pass toward the more open country beyond. Panther Pit staggered into his own hut and took down from a shelf a bottle of whiskey, from which he drank, tipping it to his lips and drinking deep and long. The fiery staff brought back his strength somewhat and put a furious courage into his heart. The top of his head had a lump on it that was swelling fast, and felt as big as a goose egg. But when one of his men examined the place, they could not find that the skin had been broken. But the blow had given him a terrific headache. He said he felt as if the top of his head was caving in, and now and then, as he tried to hurry about and ordered others to hurry, he staggered as if the liquor had already taken effect in his legs and had made them wobbly. However, he ordered up his horse and then followed the pursuers, whom he had sent on ahead and who were trailing the girl with the dogs. Panther Pit disliked to use the dogs, for their baying could be heard a long distance, and if so heard, might guide to the place persons whom he would rather not see there. He knew that his position was at the time peculiarly perilous. Friends of the girl could be expected to make an immediate search for her, and besides, Buffalo Bill and Wild Bill, he felt sure, were now in that section, with designs against him. For this reason, after the dogs had gone on a while, and then had begun to bay louder, he called them off, lest the baying should reach farther than he wished. He wanted to recapture the girl, but he desired his own security even more. This withdrawal of the dogs, though not understood by the girl, came as a blessed relief to her, just at the time when she was on the point of despair. They had gained the top of the ridge, and were hot on her trail, with their loud bellowing puncturing the night air in a way to carry terror to her very soul. Then suddenly their deep booming ceased, and was no more heard. She fancied they had lost the trail, and had turned in a wrong direction, and with a prayer of thankfulness she hastened on again, her feet now torn and bleeding, and her strength fast giving way. Panther Pete led that night pursuit of the girl as well as he could, and he cursed her and himself with fiery anger, calling himself a fool for being so kind to her and so careless, and calling her by epithets she would have blushed to hear. When daylight came, this pursuit was still being carried on, but it had lost its first force, and was conducted by the man as an almost aimless search of the country close about the entrance to the Heathen Valley. After the sun rose, Panther Pete took it up again himself, giving earnest orders to his men, and instructions as to how to use the dogs. Then he set forth alone, looking for the trail in what he thought the most likely places, following along the narrow path that led directly away from the valley entrance. This took him by and by across the trail which led from the outer plains toward the trap, where his sharpshooters were at the moment in hiding, and to which his stool pigeons were at the time conducting the man whom they had fallen in with, Buffalo Bill and his pard, and young Danton and Silas DeLand. The scouts with their prisoner were coming along that trail, guided by Garland. They were wide awake and wary. Garland had undertaken as difficult a thing as he had ever attempted, in trying to lead this experienced plainsman into that trap. At intervals, Buffalo Bill rode his horse to the top of some hill or ridge, and from these higher elevations surveyed the surrounding country with his field glass. While thus engaged, he beheld a horseman some distance away. When he leveled the glass on his horseman, he was given a genuine surprise, for the man was Panther Pete, and he resembled the scout in his general appearance and makeup so strongly that Buffalo Bill knew he was looking on his counterpart, on Panther Pete, the rascal, who had played his desperate game so successfully that for a long time he had deceived the whole country as to his real identity. The scout's anger rose as he looked at that man. Then he came to the quick determination to capture the rascal if it could be done. He moved back and, dismounting, tied his horse, then crept forward. He noted the course Panther Pete was taking, and saw that he would pass along a thread of trail that led beneath some bluffs not far off. The scout drew back, and then descending, he hurried to put himself on top of those bluffs. By this time Panther Pete was quite near, coming on at an easy jog of his horse. There was nothing in his appearance to tell of the pain he suffered, for his head was throbbing, nor of what he had gone through, nor of what he was now trying to do. But Buffalo Bill saw his chance, a desperate one, and made ready for it. Crouching on the bluff, he could have shot Panther Pete without difficulty, but he did not want to do that. He wanted to take him alive. When Panther Pete's horse passed beneath him, Buffalo Bill crouched for the spring. "I'll stop your deviltry right now," said the scout in a rage, as he leaped at the desperado whose clever masquerading as his double has brought disgrace on the honored name of Buffalo Bill. He hit the horseman fair in that leap, and Panther Pete went over sideways, out of the saddle, and fell to the ground, with the dauntless scout falling on top of him. The horse gave a jump, and then ran, frightened by what had occurred. Buffalo Bill set his fingers to the throat of Panther Pete, who was to stand by that sudden onslaught and fall to make such resistance. "Surrender!" was the sharp command. Panther Pete tried to struggle, but he was helpless. "Surrender!" I surrender," The rascal gurgled in fright. Buffalo Bill lifted his revolver and fired it, for the purpose of summoning Wild Bill, and soon after he heard the clatter of Wild Bill's pony, the pony that had been the property of Garland. They soon came in sight round the end of the hill, Garland mounted in front untied, and behind him on the same pony Wild Bill with revolver ready. There was never a more astonished man than Garland. When the pony had brought him under the bluffs, and he saw there his leader, helpless and choking in the grasp of Buffalo Bill, Wild Bill slid from the back of the pony and ran to his part's aid. "Just tie him as quick as you can," said Buffalo Bill. He released the villain's throat, but held his revolver before his eyes. Wild Bill lost no time in complying. While doing this, he was startled by hearing the clatter of the pony's feet. Garland, thoroughly frightened now, had started the pony in the hope of escaping, even though tied. "Stop!" Wild Bill drew down on him. "I can't stop!" Garland yelled. "The pony is running away with me." "Oh, you can't, huh?" Wild Bill yelled to the pony, commanding it to stop, and so Garland dug his tied heels into the pony's side to make it go on. His revolver cracked, and the pony pitched over with a bullet in his head. In its fall it pinned Garland's leg under it, and held him fast, so that with the cords on him he was in a helpless position. "Stay there a while," said Wild Bill grimly, as he turned back to aid Buffalo Bill in securing the robber chief. As they tied Panther Pete, they marveled at his cleverness, for they saw that his resemblance to Buffalo Bill was largely due to the clothing he had on, to the manner in which he wore his hair and beard, together with the fact that he was a large and tall man. Out of his eyes now looked terror, for he knew who these men were, and he feared them with deathly fear. End of chapter 43. Chapter 44 of Buffalo Bill's Ruse by Prentiss Ingraham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Girl's Flight. Ellen West, much relieved by the ceasing of that terrible baying of the hounds, stumbled on through the darkness, over the rough stones that cut her feet and tore her clothing, filled with the hopeful assurance that whatever befell her, she was for the time out of the power of Panther Pete and his gang of desperadoes. By and by, when she felt that she could go not another step, being utterly spent, she sank down on the ground. About her was darkness and silence, with the kindly stars looking down on her. Sometimes she wondered if she were not dreaming, and would soon awake in her own home and discover that all this was but a wild nightmare. But the chill of the night air, after her exertions, told her soon that it was all too real. She crawled beneath an overhanging rock for shelter, and there, after a time, she fell asleep. She was so worn that she slept heavily, in spite of all that had happened, and did not awake until the sun was beating hot in her face. She aroused with a start and looked about uneasily. She saw that her clothing was torn and draggled, and that her shoes were cut by the rocks, which had also cut her feet. Her hands and arms and her face were scratched. She started up, fearing pursuit, and then, seeing nothing and hearing nothing, she began to take stock of her situation. It was bad enough, but so much better than it had been that she felt hopeful. She shuddered at the memory of Panther Pete lying as if dead on the earthen floor of the hut, where she had struck him down, but she could not blame herself for that seemingly bloody deed, Self-preservation is the first law of nature, and she had acted according to the law. When she tried to go on, she found that she was so stiff and sore from her tremendous exertions that at first she could hardly walk. But she forced herself to move on, and this feeling began to wear slowly away. She was conscious, too, that she was very hungry, but there was nothing to eat except some berries she found growing by the trail. There was water in little pools in the bottom of the shallow bed of the stream, and there she drank. Then she went on again, shaping her course by the sun as well as she could, hoping that by steady walking she could by and by reach the more open country, and so make her way back to Scarlet Gulch. But as she thus went on, and when everything seemed to be in her favor, she heard again that horrible baying of dogs. The outlaws, growing anxious or desperate, had decided to use the dogs again, and had taken them to the place where, in the night, they had been called off, and there had set them to work once more. As that baying broke on the air, the startled girl began to run, and again her heart throbbed with fear. All her bright hopes came as suddenly to the ground as a bird with a broken wing. As she thus ran on, her limbs trembling and weak, she saw in the path before her horsemen. She thought they were some of the desperadoes of Panther Pete's band, and she turned aside, hoping they had not seen her, or that she could in some way escape them. They rode toward her, shouting. Terror shook her, for one of them seemed to be Panther Pete himself. She ran then as she had never run before. The horseman came up to her, shouting to her. When she was quite close on her, and she saw that she could not get away, she turned at bay. Then she saw that this man was not Panther Pete, though he so resembled him. The man was Buffalo Bill, the noted scout, and he rode up to her, doffing his hat, and spoke kindly to her. She was so breathless, and so puzzled and startled, that for a time she could not speak in answer to his queries. He announced his identity. "I have a part back here, and some prisoners," he said, one of them being the notorious road agent Panther Pete. "Panther Pete!" she gasped. "We captured him but a little while ago," he said. He looked at her earnestly and swung out of his saddle. "I think you need this horse a good deal more than I do," he declared. "You had better ride now. You are quite worn out." She stood before him trembling. "You're not Panther Pete. Can it be?" "I am William F. Cody," he said, "better known as Buffalo Bill." He lifted his head, listening to the baying of the dogs. "They are pursuing you, I think," he remarked. "Yes." "Well, I'm here to see that they don't harm you. Will you please take my horse? I have an idea those dogs belong to the outlaws that I know are in this section. But we will see that they do not harm you." His assurance tended to dissipate her fears. She stared at him with large eyes that were still round and terrified. "I was held by Panther Pete, whom I used to think was Buffalo Bill," she stated, "and I escaped from the hut he placed me in, over somewhere in that direction. I thought I—" He saw her reel with weakness. "My dear young lady," he said, putting forth his hand to sustain her, "I must insist that you take my horse if you feel at all able to ride." She glanced at Wild Bill, who was approaching with the prisoners, Panther Pete and Garland. The clamor of the dogs broke louder in the air. "Yes, yes," she said, when she heard again the terrifying sound. "I can ride." Buffalo Bill helped her mount to the saddle. He was afoot now, and so was Wild Bill, for the latter had mounted his two prisoners on the one horse, and had tied them, and held them cowed with his revolver. Buffalo Bill glanced about. He knew that the dogs were not alone, and that soon some of Panther Pete's desperate followers would be inside, after which there would probably be a lively battle, with the odds probably against him and his part. He saw a hollow in the rocks just across the path, not far away. "We can put the horses behind the hill there," he said to Wild Bill, "and then we can get into that pocket-like place, and by heaping up a sort of breastworks make a stand so strong that will trouble the rascals, if no more." "Correct," Wild Bill assented, "and I guess we'd better move lively." They moved lively, and were soon in the hollow spoken of, with the horses out of sight behind the rise of the hill. The prisoners were tied anew, and so securely that there was little chance they could break away, and the girl who had been taken from the horse was asked by the scouts to watch them. Then Buffalo Bill and his companion set to work to roll some stones together in front of their hiding place, and behind these stones they meant to take their stand. Soon the dogs were inside, baying, and came on, following the tracks of the girl, with noses held close to the ground. They were big brutes, 3 of them, of ferocious aspect. Behind them appeared several horsemen, riding at a rapid pace, but not too fast for the dogs. It was clear that the girl would soon have been overtaken if she had not found friends to aid her. She looked at the dogs with a shudder, realizing what that pursuit had meant to her. "Don't be frightened, my dear young lady," said Buffalo Bill. "But those men will attack you." "Oh, yes, we expect that, but it's a game we can play also. They'll find it warm when they try to get at us here." "Aye, they will," assented Wild Bill, as he looked to his rifle and revolvers, and poked into them new cartridges. "I'm opining there will be some dead men decorating that trail in a very few minutes, if those fellows come on." The men came on, with the dogs leading. Then the dogs discovered the man and the girl in the hollow of the rocks, and they charged, baying savagely. "Here's for dead dog meat," said Wild Bill with a reckless laugh, as his revolver spouted its flame and lead, and the foremost dog pitched over, rolling down the hill. The horsemen farther down the trail drew rein. "Just come on," said Wild Bill, speaking to them, but in a low tone. The other 2 dogs dashed at the barricade. One rolled downhill, killed by Buffalo Bill's bullet. The other, frightened by that, retreated, and dashed up the trail, barking in a startled manner. The horsemen dismounted, and began to confer. There were 6 of them, but soon more appeared, and then it became evident that still others were advancing along another trail that centered at this point. The horsemen did not hesitate and confer long. They took their horses back out of sight and disappeared themselves. "They are gone," said the girl. "And will come back again," said Wild Bill. In a little while a rifle spouted from out of the near-by hills, and the leaden muzzle whistled past the girl's head and struck the rock behind her. "Down," said Buffalo Bill. Another rifle flamed from another hill, and the lead came into the hollow. The sharpshooters were beginning their work. They had located their quarry, and from eminences that gave them range to the place they opened up now, determined to slay the man who had taken refuge there. End of chapter 44. Chapter 45 of Buffalo Bill's Ruse by Prentiss Ingraham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The flag of truce. DeLand and Denton, with their stool pigeon prisoner, were not far away when this battle opened up. Hatfield was piloting them to that trap, where he expected the sharpshooters would slay them. But when he heard the crack of those rifles, he recognized by the reports that they were the guns of some of the men he had thought were in the trap. That they were out there firing told him that something had gone wrong. "Hear that?" he said. "Yes," said Denton. "What do you make of it?" "Some kind of a fight, I reckon," said Hatfield. "You stay here while I'll look into that, will ya? From the sound of it, I'm judging that a battle is going on that maybe we're interested in, or might get interested in." Denton did not like to remain behind. He had no thought, though, that his sweetheart was over there, where that shooting was going on, for he did not know where she was, except that he believed she was held by Panther Pit, and Hatfield had been professing to lead them to Panther Pit's lair. Hatfield looked uneasily in the direction of the fire. The land was disappearing in that direction. Denton took out his revolver. "Remember, no breaks," he warned, when he saw the eager light in Hatfield's eyes. "I'm licensed to shoot you if you try any." The land rode straight toward the firing, until he came within a comparatively short distance, and then he concealed his horse in a thicket and crept forward on foot, taking with him his precious grip, containing the rain-making material so dear to his heart. He never let that out of his hands for long. The outlaws had drawn together, finding one point from which they could fire best down into the hollow where Wild Bill and Buffalo Bill had taken concealment. They could see nothing now but the rocks there, but they were shooting, nevertheless, hoping to hit something. The land was able to take advantage of this, the attention of the outlaws being drawn to that barricade of stones, and he crawled close up to them, being higher than they were, on the ridge behind them. As he looked down, he saw 10 of the rascals lying there behind the rocks, with their rifles pointed down at another group of rocks some distance below and on the opposite side of the narrow trail. As he thus looked over, exposing himself, a rifle flamed in the barricade, and a bullet cut through his head. He dropped flat with remarkable celerity. "Great floods!" he gurgled. "That rifled man came nigh getting me. I'll have to look out, or I'll have my precious skull perforated. Wonder who's doing that shooting." It took him some time to make out, and he did not thoroughly understand the situation until he saw one of the outlaws walk out toward the barricade, waving a white flag, and saw Buffalo Bill come forth to meet him. The outlaws had discovered that the scouts held Panther Pit a prisoner, and they wanted to confer and negotiate for his release. The bearer of the white flag had a proposition. "Release Panther Pit and we'll stop our shooting," he said, "and we'll get out of the country. You can keep the girl. Just give us the prisoners you've got." "How did you know who we've got?" the scout demanded, somewhat surprised. "One of us has got a field glass, and he saw Panther Pit and the others down here. Surrender them to us, and we'll get out of this fight and leave the country." Buffalo Bill's answer was a defiance. "No," he said, "come and get us." "We'll wipe the whole of you out if you don't surrender them," the outlaw threatened. "Proceed with the process," said the scout. "We've got Panther Pit and the fellow whose name is Garland, and we mean to hold them. If you want them badly, come and get them." The outlaw retired and was no sooner behind the rocks than the sharpshooters opened again. But having discovered that the leader was held there, they were more careful, and their shooting did no damage. More men were coming, for the outlaws had sent runners back to the camp, and these were hurrying up reinforcements. DeLand, from his post of observation, saw the arrival of these reinforcements. "Great fish hooks," he gasped. "This is a ticklish business, and I reckon it's down in the bills for someone to get hurt. Hope it ain't going to be me." Then he had an inspiration. He glanced at the sky, gray and cloudy, as if threatening rain. "Guess it's time," he said. "I reckon that this here dry country is but needing rain. I might try some more rain-making experiments, only I hate to waste the material here that I intended to experiment with down in the town. But—" He opened the grip he had brought, and as he did so, heard a step behind him. He turned with one of the bombs in his hand, intending to hurl it at any foe he saw there, and was astonished to behold Denton. "I couldn't stay back there," Denton whispered. "So I tied that villain and came in, following you. Something's doing down there." He glanced up the trail. "Yes, and more men coming." "Buffalo Bill's down there," said DeLand, "and they've been training their batteries on him. I think I seen the flutter of a woman's dress down there, too, and—" "Ellen!" gasped Denton, immensely excited. "I don't know. Seems as though it may be, and there comes more reinforcements. So there's going to be a lively time round here mighty quick, and in the end the folks down there will be killed, I reckon." "We must go to their aid," Denton panted, his eyes shining. "Just what I was thinking of doing, but don't holler about and give them warning. See this here?" He held up the rain bomb. "And you see them men down there?" Denton nodded. "Well, now you'll see some fun, for this ain't exactly the same kind as I fired into the crowd in the town. This will wake 'em up." He lifted himself and hurled the bomb, with such true aim and force that it struck right in the midst of the hidden riflemen. There was a flash and a deafening roar, and a blinding cloud of white smoke covered everything. Out of that white smoke men leaped, some of them tumbling and falling, all thoroughly frightened. When the smoke lifted, 3 of them were seen dead on the ground, for the bomb this time had been a genuine one. "Ho ho!" chuckled DeLand. "When I chip into a fight of this kind, something's happening right off." The outlaws did not tarry there for their remaining reinforcements. They fled, vanishing into the hills. Buffalo Bill and his companions were relieved thus quickly of their enemies, and the big battle they had anticipated was not fought. Down in the town of Scarlet Gulch, less than a week later, DeLand had an opportunity to try his rain-making bombs. He claimed the benefit of the shower that followed. Before that time, Buffalo Bill had landed his prisoners, and had added to them Buckeye Slocum and saloon keeper Rainey. The fake Buffalo Bill had suddenly reached the end of his tether, and his border ruffians, who had fled ignominiously, were scattered throughout the hills. The end. End of Buffalo Bill's Ruse, or Won by Sheer Nerve, by Prentiss Ingraham.